So, Shaun, final segment of today's show is you and Trevor talked about some teams that are ascending when you guys did that RTCF show during the break, and we've had some other things come up since then, and we wanted to get to this show of some teams that maybe are on that run the risk of taking a step back. Now, we wanted to focus on teams that were actually good last year. Like, I don't care that a team that went 6-6 goes 4-8. It's like, okay, they weren't very good last year. They're not very good this year. What are the teams that had either at least 8 or more wins last year that have a chance to take some level of a step back? Now, primarily when we look at step back, like level step back, we look at least two fewer wins or 2 more losses than they had last year. So, I could say, well, look, I think Oregon is going to take a step back, but they're going to have 11 wins or 12 wins but they may have, more losses, or maybe the schedule's not as good. I'm not making that case. I'm choosing an example. So we're going to talk about this, Shaun, and we're going to kind of go with one team at a time, and you give one, I'll give one, you give one, I'll give one. And we're going to talk about some teams that we think are on the verge of taking steps back this season. And when you sent me your list, Shaun, I said, okay, we definitely have some in common. I want to start off with one team we have in common that's relevant to Notre Dame, and that is Miami. So Miami went 10-3 last year. You have them as one of your teams that is going to take a step back this year. So let's talk about that one first before we get to some of the ones where I have this team, you have that team, and go through it that way. So let's talk about the Hurricanes, Shaun.
Well, just foundationally, I don't believe in the program that Mario Cristobal has built. Just foundationally, what is your core? What is your anchor? We know what Marcus Freeman's program is all about. Up front, trenches, run the ball, defense. Miami, year to year, offensively, they're dynamic because of Cam Ward, who's presumptive, the number 1 overall pick. You don't have that. And you go from that to Carson Beck, who for all questions, injury was part of that, but it's a great possibility that he would have moved on, and they would have moved on to Gunnar Stockton down in Athens without the injury. Not impressed by that. They lose a lot in the wide receiving core, right? That offensive line, who was really good for the most part of last year, what are they going to be? Because they did lose some veteran leadership up front. They have some really good guys on the interior of that offensive line. Defensively, stout, but exposed by Georgia Tech, in my opinion, and a couple of other teams. Just slow. They're big, but they're slow. They're one-dimensional. The defensive backfield, from a recruiting standpoint, has been pretty good. The last 2 years. But I just don't believe in the program and who they are fundamentally and foundationally. So I think with the step back and dynamic quarterback play, which pretty much, look, Cam wasn't as dynamic as he was. They lose 2 to 3 other games last year.
At least.
They
definitely lose to Cal.
The refs stole a game from Virginia Tech.
Yes. They lose that game but it doesn't get stolen if he doesn't play. They definitely lose to Virginia Tech. They definitely lose to Cal last year, Shaun. I don't think there's any debate about that. They definitely lose to Louisville last year as well. I mean, Louisville scored 45 points on that football team. They won that game because Cam Ward threw 319 yards and 4 touchdowns. And, oh, by the way, also rushed for another 29 yards, and they just could not stop that. They couldn't stop him. He went 21 of 32 for 319 yards and 4 touchdowns, averaged 10 yards an attempt. It was one of his third or fourth highest passer rating output of the season. They don't win that game if he's not on that football team. I don't know that they beat Duke if he doesn't play in that game, if he's not their quarterback. Duke was smacking them early in that game, and he just kind of put on a show in the second half. So, I think they lose a lot of games last year, and he's not their. To your point, Shaun, he's not their only loss. I mean, they lost the linebacker, the Magoa kid that was a really good player. They lose a lot from their defensive line. They got some good guys. Ruben Baines, a talented guy. Armando Blunt, got some skill. Justin Scott's a talented kid. But they lose Tyler Barron. They lose C.J. Clark. They lose Simeon Barrow. They lose my go-off. If you think their secondary was good last year, Shaun, I think we could debate whether it was or wasn't. The point is they lose most of their secondary from last year, and it's a completely rebuilt secondary from last year. I think they signed like 4 corners in the portal from last season. Now, I actually like their portal pickups at cornerback, but they're still all year one players. And I'm not a big Carson Beck fan if he didn't have the UCL injury, but he did. And then also, for all the talk about Cam Ward, they also lost a pretty good running back in Damian Martinez, who had a pretty good year for Miami last year. And, oh, by the way, the entire receiving core that he had last year is gone. They lost their top 6 pass catchers from last year, Shaun. Top 6. All but one of them is off to the NFL. And Isaiah Horton's the only one who's not, and he transferred to Alabama, which, as I've said before, is one of my favorite receiver pickups of this offseason. So I don't see how that team reloads and wins 10 games again. I just don't. They have some talent in the trenches. I'll give them that. They're not going to have a bunch of bums out there running around catching passes, but they're not. They went, like you said, though, they went 10-3 with all that last year and Cam Ward, and I just don't see them being that team this year. I don't. And I think the thing you hit on at the very beginning is Mario Cristobal has never shown me he can kind of be that type of guy. He's never shown me that he can maximize the potential of a football team. I would argue that Mario Cristobal's football teams have underachieved every year he's coached, including his 2019 Oregon team that went 12-2. I mean, they had no business losing to Auburn. You had Justin Herbert at quarterback, and they had a true freshman, Bo Nix, playing in his first career game, I believe. And then you lost to Arizona State that year. Barely beat Wisconsin in a bowl game with Justin Herbert at quarterback. So even that team in 2020 was to me a disappointing team. You go out in 2021, you beat Ohio State in the opener, and then you go out and lose to Stanford, who went 3-9 that year. You lost to Utah twice and got blown out twice, and then you got blown out by Oklahoma in a bowl game in 2021. A team that beat Ohio State at Ohio State early in the season and physically whipped Ohio State in that game. And so you go out there and you do that, and that, like, when has he ever gotten the most out of his football team? Yeah. Never. And he'd have to get the most out of this team to win 10 games again.
Yeah, he would have to change his stripes per se to be able to do that. Yes. And to clarify, I wasn't speaking to the performance of the defensive backfield. I was speaking to how they recruited the position.
Gotcha.
The last 2 years.
Yeah, they've had talent.
Been pretty good. Sure. They've had talent. And like you said, they went out and revamped the entire secondary. So I don't know if that's going to bode well starting week 1. But, I definitely think they're going to take a step back. And once again, I'm going to be honest, man. I think Florida State's going to be on a comeback, and Florida's ascending. No, it can't be worse. But see, Cristobal talked all that talk about the state of Florida last year. And now it's like, okay, buddy, you don't have that guy at quarterback anymore. And these other teams don't have anywhere to go but up or expect it to be better.
You know who does have that guy at quarterback this year? Florida.
Yeah. So you had your 1 year to talk your talk. Now you're going to have to pay the price.
We are going to know by game 6 for them, Shaun, if we're right or wrong about him. Because they've got Notre Dame, Florida, Florida State, and Louisville in their first 6 games. And look, playing at Miami, Marcus Freeman knows what kind of opportunity this is for his program. Not so much that Miami's great, but the perception will be there. But they want to recruit that state more. They want to have more success recruiting that state. Don't think if they jump on Miami early, Marcus Freeman's not going to be like, Ed Yost. You know what I mean? Like he's gonna, hey, run it up, leave no doubt. You know what I mean? Like that's what he's gonna do because we've seen him do it. And so, to me, with the fragility that we've seen from Mario Cristobal's teams, they better play Notre Dame for 4 quarters. Because if they come out and get hammered by Notre Dame in the opener, which is possible, I'm not predicting it, but it's possible. 3 weeks later, you got DJ Lagway, then you got to play at Florida State, then you got Louisville. It's not going to be an easy schedule. And then after that, they got to play at SMU, who we'll have an interesting conversation about here in a little bit. They got to still play Syracuse. They got to play at Virginia Tech, and they got to play at Pitt. Miami on November 29th, Saturday, November 29th. And on Saturday, November 22nd, is going to be playing in the mountains both weeks in late November. Up north in the mountains. Do you know what happens in the north, in the mountains in November, Shaun? It gets cold. So it's going to be very, very interesting. Very, very interesting to see kind of how they are this year. And I don't have high hopes for Miami this year. I don't. I think they're one of the more talented teams that Notre Dame is going to play, but I don't think they're one of the best teams. I don't. And so I'm with you, Shaun. I think Miami takes a step back this season. Let's go to another team that you and I have on there, Shaun, that we both have on there. Actually, we have 3 that we both have on there. The next one is going to be very interesting because I'm not as sold on this one as I am the Miami one, and that's Georgia. Let's talk about the Bulldogs and why they have a chance to take a step back because they went 11-3 this year. They're the team that I think is worth talking about because they may not fit the criteria specifically that we're discussing, where they may win 10 games again, but it's still very obvious that they took a step back. But there's a chance that they could be a 9-3, 9-4 type of team at the end of the year, Shaun, and they do meet the criteria. But Miami's another team. Let's talk about the Bulldogs because I'm just glad somebody else is talking about Georgia taking a step back than just me, because I started talking about this last year.
I'm going to be honest. The argument or the information that we're talking about is really thin. Like if I were a district attorney, I don't know if I would necessarily take this to court. But we can talk about it, right? First year starter. Look at not having faith in Mike Bobo necessarily to get things right. Has Kirby corrected things after losing Fran Brown in that secondary? Recruiting, I thought, took a slight step back. So now we get to see what that defensive line, and then they lost a lot, specifically from pass rush. But, they usually replace guys like that. So once again, we'll see if the recruiting is still in tow with what they traditionally done under Kirby Smart. So it's just a lot the reason why you mentioned Georgia is because it's a lot of questions, more questions than normal for Kirby Smart in Georgia, right? And that is what brings Gunnar Stockton might have been one of their best players on the field that came to Notre Dame, and he didn't light the world on fire. So, is there something there? And he's more in line with, probably what Georgia quarterbacks need to be in order for Georgia to be a really good football team, right? He's more in line with Stetson Bennett than, say, Carson Beck was.
Sure.
Right? So it might be a blessing in disguise. But with that being said,
when you say that, Shaun, what do you mean by that? Like, because I know what I mean by that, but what do you mean by when you say he's more in line with like a Stetson Bennett, a Jake Fromm than he is because if you think about it, some of the best pro prospects that they've had have not done well.
The Easons and that means JT that because JT Dames, but this is a program that is built on if you don't give it away, we'll be fine. We have enough talent in our culture of running the ball, stopping the run, creating turnovers, and being relentless. This is going to be who we are. So if the quarterback can come in and be efficient, timely, and be a playmaker, Gunnar Stockton has more playmaker in him than Carson Beck. Carson Beck was a one-trick pony, and he was a bad one-trick pony because he would come up with big plays, but then he would come up with the awful play to just totally negate what he just did in the passing game, right? The same way he brought you back against Alabama, he'll get the ball and be in position to win the game and throw an awful interception to just end all hopes. And that's what you had, right? Gunnar Stockton is just going to depend on everybody else and be a maestro and conduct everything the way it needs to be conducted. But I just don't know, the composer being Mike Bobo. I don't know if he really puts the conductor in the right positions for it to be sweet music when the orchestra, the offense starts playing. That's a big question for me. That's a big question for me, right? Because we saw second year Mike Bobo. Was it really an improvement? Did you really see what you needed to see? And he had Carson Beck for another. So
yeah,
that's a huge question mark for me.
It's what you're saying this, Shaun, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Because one of my things is the further they get away from Todd Monken, the more they look like. But the difference, the reason I think because again, before Todd Monken showed up, they were still 12-2, 10-11-3. Here's the issue for Georgia. I think Georgia, of all the superpowers in college football, the Bamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Notre Dames, the Oregons, I think Georgia's the team that's hurt the most from NIL. I think they're the team that has suffered most from the NIL era because Kirby's still trying to run the program the way that Nick Saban did at Bama when he was there, which is just stockpile 5 stars every year. And then they just stay there. And then when their time comes, because they had a kid that started at cornerback last year that kind of got benched, I believe, and then just quit the team. And he transferred somewhere else. And you're seeing Damian Wilson is projected to be, in my opinion, like Damian Wilson's after all the losses, after Mykel Williams is gone, Jalen Walker's gone, I'm expecting Damian Wilson to step in the starting lineup and become the next star edge rusher from Georgia. Guess who he's going to be a star edge rusher for in 2025? Missouri. Because he jumped in the portal. But you got him because you bought him. Before NIL, Georgia was still buying players. But because the portal was the way that it was, they couldn't just jump back in the portal and get that next big payday the way that Damian Wilson did this past year. Damon Wilson, excuse me. I think people still know what I'm talking about. So that's the thing that's hurting them, Shaun, is they keep losing that type of talent year after year after year where they just can't stockpile players and stash players that nobody else gets because they're losing portal guys that are talented every year. Julian Humphreys, the kid I'm thinking of, the cornerback. And so that's where I look at it, and they don't have that Brock Bowers type on offense that they can put their shoulders on. And their offensive line has not been what it was before either. And so, those are all factors. But you want to know what the final piece of this puzzle is for me, Shaun? I look at this Georgia defensive line, and I'm like, it's not going to be terrible, but it's not what it has been in the past. I just don't think the talent is there that they've had in the past. I don't think they have the same talent. Their linebackers are going to be really good. C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, Chris Cole, really good linebackers. Their secondary talent, I think, is actually going to be overall a little better than it was last year at spots. I think Dalen Everett's has a chance to be a really good player. He's talented. He's just young. KJ Bolden's really talented. Those two spots will be better, but they got the same nickel they had last year. Daniel Harris is not the kind of athlete they used to put out on the field. And Jonel Aguero's son of the same kind of guy. So, that's kind of where I'm at. And it's just like, I don't see the talent at Georgia that we've seen in the past. And then you combine that, Shaun, with they lost 3 games last year with all the talent they had on the defensive front seven. And then they come in this year and they don't have that talent. They still got to play at Tennessee. They got to play at Auburn, who's going to be improved. They got to play Florida on a neutral field. They got to play at Georgia Tech, who I think has a chance to be a good football team this year. They got Bama at home. They got Ole Miss at home. And they got Texas at home. I think this is a team that could go 9-3 in the regular season and not play for the SEC title and then play in a bowl game. And you know what happens to Georgia when they play in a bowl game, Shaun? They're not going to have anybody there in the bowl game. So I could see Georgia taking a step back. I'm not sold on this team. They owned Texas last year. I get that. But if Texas just shows up and plays once against Georgia, we're having a much different conversation about Georgia's season last year.
That's the top. Now you're talking about a team changing its stripes and is showing some fortitude. They're chasing, which is funny because Texas is chasing Georgia. Notre Dame is chasing Ohio State. Yeah. Texas is chasing Georgia. Yeah, Texas is chasing Georgia. For me, a step back for Georgia. I look at the schedule. The schedule is very favorable because everybody comes to Georgia except for Tennessee. All of their big games are at home.
Tennessee, Georgia Tech's the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of their big games are at home.
I think the Auburn games concerns me a little bit, Sean, to be honest with you.
It could be because of style.
And they didn't play that well against Auburn last year. I think Auburn's going to be better this year. Yeah.
That's. But for me, a step back would be, oh man, Georgia, because Georgia could have the type of season you're describing and still be in the hunt for
just
going
like
to the
last
SEC
year
championship, just like last year.
Right.
Because they took a step back last year in the eyes of most, and still won the
13-1 to 11-3. Yeah.
Yes. So do I think they lose 5 games? I don't. But for me, taking a step back, if Georgia's not in the SEC championship game, that's a step back, in my opinion.
And I don't think they will.
Yeah.
Because Sean, here's part of it to me too. I think for the first time in Kirby Smart's tenure in a long time, there's going to be at least 2 games they play this year where they have a somewhat, and you could argue in kind of significantly inferior roster to the team they're going to play at home. So, I don't know that it's a given that they're going to win at home like they did last year. I don't know it's a given that they're going to beat Alabama at home this year. I don't think it's a given they're going to beat Texas at home. The reason that right now I'm betting on Georgia to beat Texas at home is because I need to see Steve Sarkisian show me that he understands this is not a 7-on-7 contest and that you actually have to play physical football and you can't just go out athlete people. But I have a feeling with Arch Manning at quarterback that Texas is going to look a little bit different this year because I don't think Steve Sarkisian's an idiot. I don't. I think he's a really smart football coach. But I think then he was building to me around what he thought they needed to be with the quarterback they had, in the injuries they had at running back, along with the losses they had. I don't think he's going to look at it the same way this year. At least I hope he doesn't. And maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but I think he's a really smart football coach. I think they're going to look a little bit different. And you can't tell me he's going to lose the way they lost 3 times last year, including getting bullied and that doesn't even include getting bullied in the second half by Arizona State in the trenches, and say, we're fine. I don't think you get to where Steve Sarkisian got to in this profession without having some awareness of where your team fell short in those moments. I don't. So I think they're going to fix some of those things. So I don't know that it's – and Ole Miss just flat out smacked them last year. Now, I don't know that Ole Miss is going to be as good as they were last year, which we'll talk about here in a second. But that's my concern with them is I think their schedule is still – it is easier than it was last year. You're 100% spot on that one, Sean. It is because they don't have to go to Bama, to Ole Miss, and to Texas like they did last year. But I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last year either. So those are different things that I look at and I say, hey, listen, man, I'm very curious to see how this football team performs this year with less talent. I don't think they're going to be that much better receiver next year than they were last year. I don't know how much better they're going to be on the O-line this year than they were last year. I think their D-line's not – you're going to tell me they're going to be better on the D-line this year without Michael Williams, without Nazir Stackhouse, without some Jalen Walker, without the guys they lost last year, without Damon Wilson? I don't see that. What makes us think they're going to all of a sudden be better in the secondary? Because they added, Zion Branch and Jaden Harris? You know what I mean, from Miami, who played on a bad secondary last year in Miami. I just don't see Georgia being that team. And with Mike Bobo at OC, I think that's the final straw for me. That I think Georgia, until Kirby Smart recorrects, I think they're going to continue to fall back. Recorrects means you got to change your offense. You got to change how you build a football team. Because you can't keep building the way you were building it pre-NIL, pre-transfer portal, because your team is not going to be able to be as successful. You can't just buy players. You got to find guys that are bought in to what you're doing, because the guys that are bought into what you're doing are going to stay. They're not just going to keep jumping in the portal when things aren't going their way. They're going to stay. And that's where I'm at. So I think he takes a step back this season. I do not think Georgia will play for the SEC title. Now, we reserve the right to change our opinion based on what happens in the spring portal. You know what I'm saying? That may change. They may decide, hey, we got to go all in the spring portal if the right guys jump in, because maybe spring ball opened up Kirby's eyes, because Kirby Smart also didn't get to where he is. by being a dummy. I wonder how much he's going to be impacted by what happened to them last year against Ole Miss and Bama, and then especially Notre Dame, and be like, wow, okay, we got to do something different. So I'm very curious to see how that happens after the spring. But I have Georgia, you and I have Georgia taking a step back. Third team that we have our eye on, Shaun, and this is the one where I think they're going to take a step back, but I still think they're going to be pretty good, and that's Oregon. Because they could go 11-3 this year, be a pretty good football team, and that's still a step back from being 13-1, winning the Big Ten, and being the number 1 overall seed in the playoffs. How big of a step back do you think Oregon takes this year, Shaun, and why?
First year starter, second year in the Big Ten for other Big Ten teams to really understand who Oregon is. And I think we started to see that when they went up to Wisconsin at the end of the year. And Wisconsin really dominated that game for 3 quarters. And then the dynamic of that offense for Oregon kind of took over. So that is my concern. The Big Ten catching up to Oregon, what they do, first time starter at quarterback. They lost a lot at wide receiver, some big time playmakers and speed offensively. But, they recruit, so they will have talent at the skill positions. And then defensively, they have some guys up front that are going to be pretty good. They came back. But I'm very interested in that secondary and what it's going to look like for Oregon. I think Penn State takes a step forward, in my opinion. And that's crazy seeing that they were in the semifinal. But I do think Penn State becomes that Ohio State team from a motivation standpoint where all of those kids came back for a purpose. All of the Ohio State kids came back for a purpose. And you saw Penn State, after a tough loss in the semifinals, say, look, let's come back and finish the job. And so I think they'll have that motivation as a team. So I see them being at best, the third best team in the Big Ten, as opposed to being the best team in the Big Ten. And then if Indiana somehow, some way improves and Oregon ends up being the 4th best team in the Big Ten, that's definitely a step back.
Yeah.
That's without question a step back. And that's not to say they wouldn't have an outside chance of still making it into the playoffs. But it's a lot going against what Oregon was last year and ultimately what they end up being this year. So that, for me, is a team that has a chance to take a step back for those reasons.
Yeah. What I find interesting, Shaun, is I think they could take a step back and their record won't reflect it quite as much. Some of my concerns with Oregon are they lost a lot of players and they're basically rebuilding in a lot of ways, not rebuilding, reloading through the portal. They have some talented players coming back. Evan Stewart comes back. Justice Lowe comes back. They got a couple interior linemen come back. Dante was on the team last year, which I think Dante needed that year of growing up as a young man, learning, being out of spotlight. There's some people talking about him, but they're not talking about him the way that they were in the past. I think he needs that. Defensively, they have some guys coming back, obviously, that are coming back. Obviously, you've got Nico's little brother, Mateo. You've got a couple really good linebackers. You've got a couple good DBs, but they're also, they're banking on their interior defensive line being built around Bear Alexander. Really? Your offensive line had some huge losses, and they were disappointing late last year. And I don't know that the newcomers in the portal are going to be able to replace. I mean, they lost 3 really good pass catchers last year. Yes, they have Evan Stewart coming back, but Evan Stewart was on their team last year. And they lost Trayshawn Holden, Tez Johnson, and they also lost their tight end, Terrence Ferguson, who's a pretty good football player. So I look at their defense was not great last year. I love the point you made about the Big Ten having a year of seeing that speed and then now having a better ability to prepare for it and practice against it. Their schedule, the thing that makes me think they won't take as big of a step back is their schedule. They do play at Penn State, but they get Indiana at home. They get USC at home. They get Wisconsin at home. They do play at Iowa. They do play at Washington, and those could be tricky games. But not getting Michigan or Ohio State helps them quite a bit. But I do think they could take a step back, and I don't think Dante Moore is going to be the reason why, but they had a quarterback the last couple of years that I think covered some warts that I believe exist with Dan Lanning as head coach. We're going to see if that's true or not. I think it's unfair to ask Dante in his first true full year as a starter to kind of fix some of those things, but they help themselves too. Their non-conference schedule is a joke. You get Montana State at home, Oklahoma State at home, and Oregon State at home. So they don't get the real OSU, so they get the other two OSUs. So, but that'll help them. But I'm not huge on Oregon this year. I think they take a step back. I still think they're going to be good. They may be a playoff team again, but they're not going to look like they were last year. They're not going to be the team that people are afraid of going into the postseason, in my opinion. All right, Shaun, now we also have some teams on here that we have one more team, I guess, that we agree on. That's Colorado. Buffalo's went 9-4 last year under Deion Sanders. Really had just an exceptional building season. You have the Heisman Trophy winner. You have a quarterback that's one of the top players in the country. Your team goes from, in 2022, the year before you got there, one of the biggest jokes in all of college football. You're a 1-11 team, and not only were they 1-11, Shaun, but they lost by 25, 31, 42, 28, 23, 33, 8 to Arizona State, who stunk, 39, 38, 47, and 42. So their only win was an overtime win at home against Cal, who went 4-8 that year. And they were had one of the worst rosters. The only other win or close game they had was against an Arizona State team who went 3-8 or 3-9. First year they go 4-8, then bounce back and win 9 games. Great job by Deion Sanders. But the drivers of that success are all gone. And it's not just Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders. You also talk about Joe Horn. Joe Horn's kid was Jimmy Horn, right? You lost a lot of the pieces that helped you be successful. I think they're going to have a tough time winning more than 7 games this year, in my opinion. That's why they're on my list.
With this, it's going to be what's the definition, once again, of taking a step back? Do I see them going back to a 4-win team? No, I don't. I think Deion Sanders did and was vocal about at Colorado and what is needed for us to jump into the national spotlight and improve the way we need to improve with the players we have and what we're bringing from Jackson State. I have to build this program outside in. That's just the way I have to do it. Might not be the traditional way to do it, but it's the way I have to do it, because you have to use recruiting to really build the trenches. Like, it's hard to just go out and build. USC, they tried to answer the trenches with the transfer portal, and it's like, you can't do it. That's why they're going out and just, signing everybody in the trenches, because they know this is the way we have to do it. You can't answer that through the portal, right? You can band-aid it through the portal, but you can't answer that long-term during the portal. So now this is the irony of it. We've talked about, I was like, wouldn't it be ironic if he finally figures the trenches out after losing the dynamic pieces that he loses at quarterback and on the outside? And then we talked about the additions of Caden Salter and then having Juju Lewis coming in as a freshman. Do they allow him to marinate? It's Caden Salter, who's a totally different quarterback than, say, Shedeur is. Does he fit the system and what they want to do offensively, or do they start to shape the offensive system more around his skill set? Those are going to be interesting things to watch. And so I do think that they have a chance to be good, but you pointed out the close wins that they had last year, some games they could have slipped away. Yeah. A couple more of those could go the other way this year, and they could end up being a 7-8 win team. And yes, that means it's a step back, but you can view it as a transition year as well. We're transitioning to Juju. Juju is the next dynamic guy. We're transitioning to him. We're getting the trenches better. They have a left tackle in Seton that I would assume would be much better in his sophomore year.
I would assume. Yeah.
Yeah. As a left tackle, he was heralded coming out of high school. And so he had a lot of playing time, a lot of adversity, took his lumps. Will he be better? I think Phil Loholt is still the offensive line coach there, I believe. And so, does that offensive line take a step forward? We'll see. I don't think they just plummet down to like 4 wins. I do believe they have a
Especially
chance of
getting
taking a
Caden
step back.
Salter. I think that was key because I think it was smart that they didn't just go right to Juju Smith and ask an undersized freshman quarterback, say, okay, keep it rolling. I think it's kind of like what helped Urban Meyer at Florida was he was replacing Ron Zook, not Steve Spurrier. And it was a short time that Ron Zook was there, but he was replacing him, not Steve Spurrier. You don't want to be the guy that replaces Shedeur Sanders, the coach's son. Are you kidding me? Caden Salter to me is a guy that can, I think, fit better behind a poor offensive line than Shedeur or Juju will do if they struggle again. He's a guy that can kind of get you out of some trouble. His running ability, I think, allows you to overcome the fact that you're still going to be a pretty talented throwing team, in my opinion. I mean, you're still going to have pretty good weapons to throw to, in my opinion. There are some good players coming back that were overshadowed by Travis Hunter and Horn and some guys like that I think they're going to have some good weapons to throw to. And they've got a dynamic quarterback that can help improve their run game. And their run game can get better without it having to be let's line up and run inside zone or duo or counter or power, and we've got to move this other team off the ball. We've got a guy that can scramble. We've got a guy that can do quarterback zones. We can read zone. We can RPO a little bit more effectively. Whereas last year, Shedeur Sanders had a heck of a year, but people keep calling Steve Angeli a statue. Shedeur is a bit of a statue in the pocket, the way that he plays. And you're going to have meaning like what I mean by statue, Shaun, is you knew where the quarterback was going to be every snap. He was going to be X number of yards behind the center. That's where he was going to be. And he could, maneuver around the pocket, but he was not a guy you almost like, if he scrambled, you're almost like, cool. We want you to do that because we don't want you throwing the football because that's how you can hurt us. I also think their schedule is an issue too, Shaun. They got to play Georgia Tech at home in the opener. That's going to be a very interesting game. They got to play at Houston. They got to play at TCU. They got to play at Utah, at West Virginia, at Kansas State. And then their home slate is not easy either. They play BYU at home, Iowa State at home, and Arizona State at home, which I honestly would say I'd rather play at Arizona State, at BYU, and at Iowa State, and then get some of those other teams like a West Virginia at home and a TCU at home, a Houston at home, because I got a better shot at winning those games at home, where now those games are now tougher. And the 3 best teams I play all come to our place, 4 best teams if you count Georgia Tech, where they can beat us at our place. And I don't think the schedule set up very well, but I do think we're talking about a team that if he can get them back to a bowl game, that's a successful season, in my opinion. And that's where I think they'll be. I think they'll be close to being back like a 6 to 7 win team. And we're going to look at that and say, if he can keep this team together, because there's a lot of underclassmen on this football team at Colorado, a lot of underclassmen on top, obviously the transfer guys, like, you talk about the quarterback, but you've already got his replacement, a couple of the offensive linemen. But there's a lot of underclassmen on this football team, and their incoming freshman class is small but talented. I could see that. I could see you've just got to keep some level of momentum, Shaun, where you have some good wins, you get back to a bowl game. If they can do that without Shedeur, without Travis, I actually think that would bode very well for his reputation as a coach, getting them back to a bowl game without that foundation of his kids and Travis Hunter and all that. I think it'll help that team, help that program out quite a bit. So that's where I'm at with Colorado. Let's talk about your 5th team. Go ahead, Shaun. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I just don't like one thing. I think Dion used to wake up as far as portal usage, and I don't know NIL, being in Colorado, difficulties of getting kids to come there, but certain aspects and everything. I can't speak to the fullness of that, right? That we have to dig a little bit deeper. But I will say this. The director of recruiting from the high school level is now at Notre Dame. That's number one. And now they have to replace him. And then the classes were small. The 24 class was like 13. The 25 class is small. So that is a trend to me. Like you're choosing to go small in your
Right.
recruiting classes and to depend on the portal instead of taking your medicine, man. Like one of these years, if you really want to take a big jump, you're gonna have to take your medicine. You're gonna take your medicine. You're just gonna have to go ahead, get young, get that foundational class, take your medicine. This year would have been the perfect. I would have seen this 2 years ago. Like in 2 years, when Travis and Shador leave, that's our year to take our medicine. We're gonna do the best we can with those guys, build outside in, take our medicine, really get a great class in the trenches in 25. And then, from there, we hope to make a jump because at the same time, we're allowing Julian Lewis to kind of sit, marinate, and be ready to go in 26. This year is a missed opportunity, in my opinion, to kind of change the dynamic. Great job doing what you did. You did it the way it had to be done, right? And you maxed out.
You mean building the current team? He did exactly the way he needed it to be done. Yes, correct.
And you maxed out last year. Now, I would have expected more in the recruit class of 25, especially in the trenches. But, they chose to go build the interior of that defensive line, offensive line, in the portal again. So we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah. Shaun, you look at Dan Lanning is a guy we talked about earlier. And Dan Lanning is relying a lot on the portal the last 2 years with different players to build his team. But here's what he's also done the last 2 years. In the 24 class, he signed 27 players. In the 2025 class, he signed 20 players. In the last 2 years, Deion Sanders has signed 12 and 14 high school prospects. Like, that's the point, is you maximized what you could do with this football team on the field. You did not maximize what you can do with this football team when it comes to high school recruiting. You signed 3 offensive linemen this past year. You signed 3 defensive linemen this past year. That's it. Like that, to your point, Shaun, load up on those young high school kids, coach them up, and then keep going to the portal until they're ready. But you don't even have guys to coach up to get ready the way that they've done this thing. And that's where I think Coach Sanders has made a mistake. But that also is why I have said I don't think he is thinking long-term at Colorado. He signed 5 offensive linemen the last 2 years, and he signed 6 total defensive linemen the last 2 years. That's not the mark of a coach that, to me, that's thinking long-term investment. I would not be shocked, and this is a 100% conjecture, and I'm not the only one that's thinking this, that Deion Sanders is just trying to win as much as he can until Mike Norvell gets pushed out of Florida State, or one of the Florida coaches gets pushed out.
And he takes Juju with him.
Right. And Jordan
he has his quarterback.
Right.
He has his quarterback.
Right. Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, you're not building like a coach that's here for the long haul. I don't think Dan Lanning's going anywhere. And he's building like a coach who's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Marcus Freeman's not going anywhere, and he's building like a coach who's not going anywhere. I think Deion Sanders is building like a coach who is trying to win as much as he can in the short term, so set him up for his next gig, which I don't really blame him if Florida State is his ultimate goal. I mean, that's –
because like you said, 7 wins this year would be impressive. It's Colorado.
Right.
Like we're saying, they take a step back. Dude, it's Colorado.
Right. 6-6 season 3 years ago would have seemed like, holy moly, like they're going to go 6-6.
Right.
Yeah. Agree. Shaun, let's talk about a couple teams that we don't have in common. Well, at least I don't disagree with you, but they weren't on my list. And I thought you had an interesting one. And your next one is Missouri. Let's talk about the Tigers.
And this comes from
is it because of that big loss of Drew Pine? Is that what it is, Shaun?
No, I think, look, Missouri had a really big opportunity, and this comes from me talking to people that know the local landscape of St. Louis, Kansas City, and the surrounding states and surrounding areas, that, the kids like a Jeremiah Love, like a Christian Gray, and all the talented kids like Aeneas Williams, in those last 2 to 3 years, if those kids had locked in and stayed on, we might be talking about Missouri being in the playoffs and possibly in the semifinals of a college football playoff. And so just talking to those coaches and connections in those areas, they're like, it's a missed opportunity in recruiting that now those additions and a few losses to the portal, Drink could be in trouble. He could be in trouble. And that is the fear, for high school coaches in that area and, talent evaluators that spend a lot of time in that area that, from a roster standpoint, Missouri might not be as dynamic and deep as they could have been and as they were. And so you might see a step back from Missouri and the quarterback situation. What is that going to be? It's going to be a question mark. Missouri, what we started to see, because they had an offense that was dynamic, and then they came into last year expecting for that offense to take another step forward. And even with all the talent at the skill positions, something was just off, right?
Yep.
And that's offense, man. You just hate it. If anything just misfires, it just throws the entire thing off. And so now I think Drink is in an interesting situation to where the heavy expectations last year on Missouri. And maybe they didn't respond to that quite well as a coaching staff and as a program. Right. And now maybe they go back to like where they should be, on a national landscape. Now they can get back to doing being who they are, instead of kind of reacting to who people thought they were or were going to be. It's very interesting. This is one of those cases where, outside of those conversations that kind of made the red light go off for me with people that are really connected to the program, that's what put them into my, perspective or my peripheral to say, okay, this could be a team in the program that might have missed their window to take that step forward, and they might be in danger of taking a step back.
So 10-3, so that would be 8 wins or fewer. The only reason that I could see this not happening, Shaun, and I think it could very well happen. I think they got their schedule, to me, is fortunate. They play Kansas at home. First of all, there's no Georgia on their schedule. There's no Texas. There's no LSU. There's no Ole Miss. The only quote-unquote top SEC teams they play are South Carolina, Texas A&M, which are good teams, and then Bama. They get all 3 of them at home. Now, look, Missouri's fully capable of losing at Auburn, losing at Vanderbilt, losing at Oklahoma, losing at Arkansas, and also losing some of those games at home and having that step back. And I think it's perfectly reasonable. I also don't love the quarterback pickup, to be completely honest with you. I don't. And I think he's another coach that I think your point about not taking advantage of their success on the high school recruiting trail the last 2 years is a tremendous point, because Missouri's been pretty good the last couple of years, and they haven't been able to get a lot of those top players. So I think that's one that I'm with you, Shaun. That could be an interesting one. Now, they did have some nice pickups in the portal this offseason. That is going to kind of be very interesting to kind of see how things go. I mean, they lost the kid, the Williams, forget his last name, but the kid that went to Nebraska. They replaced him with Damon Wilson, who I think right now is further along and every bit as dynamic. I think he's more prepared to help them, but just they've had a lot of losses up in the front 7 the last 2 years. And I think their receiving core is going to take a big step back as well. With all due respect, you're trying to replace Luther Burden and Theo Weiss with Kevin Coleman, and I just don't think that's going to go overly well. I don't. He's a good football player. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that's going to go overly well.
Like I said, they got good football players, and then I don't want to mispronounce his name because I might get called out in the chat. But the quarterback pickup from Penn State, the backup, he reminds me of like John. Did you remember John Concat got that big deal in the NBA because they extrapolated like his numbers? If he played 40 minutes, if you stretch his numbers out over 40 minutes,
he wasn't playing.
He's averaging a double-double, right? Yeah. And I fear that watching that kid come in with specific packages to help him be successful, and you try to extrapolate that across him as far as him being a starting quarterback, I don't know if that's a dangerous game. That's a dangerous game that you play, right? And so, like you said, the quarterback, it's a question mark, right? And when the
Brady
quarterback is right, when the quarterback is right and drinks offense,
we saw that last year in 2023. And that's the one potential saving grace that they could have this year, Shaun, is because I don't think Bo Prabula is a bad quarterback. I just don't think he's the quarterback people make him out to be. I mean, we've seen throughout history of you and I's lifetime. I mean, remember when Scott Mitchell got that big old contract? Remember when Matt Castle got that big old contract because they came off the bench and did some things and remember when the Bills kept trying to force Rob Johnson into the starting lineup over Doug Flutie because of what he did coming off the bench for somebody, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of feel that a little bit with Bo. I've never been as high. I mean, he's a good quarterback. The thing that's the saving grace for them though, or for Bo, is he's not replacing 2023 Brady Cook that passed for 3,300 yards and 255 a game and completed 66% of his passes. He's trying to overcome, last year's offense where they passed for 225 yards a game, 14 touchdowns and 5 picks. I actually think he can replicate that. And then he can add a little bit of a running fact to there. I mean, Brady Cook wasn't a stiff, but he's not the runner that Bo is either, in my opinion.
Right.
But Theo Weiss and Luther Bolden are huge losses for them. Huge losses for them. So I could see them taking a step back. Although they're one of those teams, Shaun, that their record could look better than they actually are because of their schedule.
Because of the schedule,
that it could be that. But I also don't think the game that I've got on my eye that I'm watching them is their second game. They're at home against Kansas. And I'm very curious to see how that game goes.
Kansas might be on a revenge tour.
Rebounds. Jalen Daniels. That'll be before he gets hurt, most likely. That'll be a very interesting one, Shaun. I had a couple also. I like the Missouri one. A couple other teams. There are some smaller level teams I think Army takes a step back. I think Boise takes a step back. I think UNLV, I think they all take a step back. We talked about Miami. We talked about Colorado. Here's a couple for you, Shaun. I think SMU takes a step back. And I still think SMU is going to be a good football team. I still think they're going to be a good football team. I think they're still going to be a team that's a good bowl team. They're going to be in the top third of potentially of the ACC. Pardon me, of the ACC. But here's my concern with SMU. Number one, it kind of goes back to what you had said a little bit about Oregon. This is now going to be year 2 of them in that league. Teams have seen them a little bit. They're going to be a little bit more used to them. I think SMU suffered some pretty key personnel losses. Now, they got a lot of good players coming back, but what was so good about them last year, they were so deep. Shaun, they could just run 3 running backs out there. They could run 6 or 7 receivers out there and kind of go at you. You look at their offensive line, they lost a couple really good players there, but it's more so on defense. They had a very underrated defense the last 2 years. Like, people talk about Rhett Lashley in the offense and Kevin Jennings and all that kind of stuff. But what people missed is the last couple of years, SMU's been pretty good on defense. They gave up 17.8 points a game 2 years ago. Last year, they gave up 22, and that number got boosted a little bit by their last 2 games because they gave up 72 points in their last 2 games of the year. But what got them to that point, Shaun, is the fact that prior to those last 2 games, they were only giving up, let's see here, that's not correct. I put their offensive numbers in. I'm like, no, they weren't giving up over 30 points a game. But if you look at where they were going into the postseason, they were at 19.8. When you have an offense like they have, and you're only giving up 19.8 points a game, you're going to be a pretty good football team. I also think they benefited from just a down year in the ACC. It just was. So I look at their schedule in 2025, Shaun. They got to play East Texas A&M, should be a win. They get Baylor at home. They play at Missouri State. We've said this. There was a buy-sell hold about this the last week, I believe. I can't remember who it was, but they talked about that SMU-TCU game. They got to play at TCU. They also have to play at Clemson. They also have to play at BC, at Cal. They get Syracuse at home. They get Miami at home, and they get Louisville at home. I could see SMU being a 9-3 football team this year. And that's a pretty big step back from a team that played in the college football playoff the year before. I think their floor is probably 8-4. I think their ceiling is probably 10-2, which if they get to their ceiling, that's a good building year, because that says to recruits that, hey, we're not going away. This is a place to come. We're not going away. We're still a good football team. But I could see them being an 8-9 win team this year. I also think that I think Kevin Jennings got a little bit exposed last year down the stretch of the season, Shaun. When you look at kind of against Clemson, especially against Penn State, but even so against Cal a little bit, he wasn't nearly as dynamic in his last 5 games as he was coming into that, because I think people said, okay, this is a talented quarterback, but here's how you can contain him and kind of keep him from really taking a game over. And I think that's going to hurt him a little bit as well, also on top of their defense taking a step back.
I understand why anyone would have SMU as a part of their group of teams that can take a step back. I believe in Rhett Lashley and his ability to build a program. So I compare him to Crystal Ball. I compare him to a perfect example. They brought in 23 kids. They brought in 2 dynamic wide receivers. They brought in defensive linemen, offensive linemen, recruiting wise, but then they went ham in the portal, defensive line and offensive line. So now they used the portal. The same thing told Colorado should have done. This is what Rhett Lashley did, right? He lost a lot defensively, like you said. He pieced that together. He's going to piece the defense together. But in his mind, he thinks, we're going to continue to be dynamic at the skill positions, and I expect my quarterback to become even better. This is what he's thinking. Now, whether or not we believe it remains to be seen. Basically, what you just said, teams figure things out. But Rhett Lashley is going to coach his tail off.
But what did he do in the portal, Shaun? He went out and got Tyler Van Dyke as a backup quarterback. That's a good backup quarterback.
That's another thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. If Kevin gets hurt because of his play style, you have it right. You have
absolutely. So now, I believe in Rhett Lashley. That for me, point,
Shaun, 23 high school signees last year.
Yes. Instead of 13 or 14 or 12, like, okay, you're going to go crazy.
Had a big portal class.
Yeah.
But the portal class, here's what I like about they did in the portal class, Shaun. The 2 offensive linemen they got out of the portal, Josh Bates and Addison Nichols, both have multiple years of eligibility left. They got a linebacker that's got multiple years of eligibility left. They brought a lot of the DBs and some of the guys have on defense are portal guys, but when they go to the portal, they're getting guys with multiple years of eligibility left. That shows me he understands culture matters here. But if I need to go get a one and done to bridge the gap, I'll get a one and done. Shaun, I want to say this. I don't disagree with what you're saying about Rhett Lashley. And I think the fact that we're having a conversation about them having a 9-3 step back season speaks volumes about the job he's doing at SMU. They're not a flash in the pan. They're going to go 6-6 last year. Or they were relying on 2 players like Colorado was, and we're talking about them going from 9 wins to 6 wins or something like that. I'm talking about them going from 11 to 9. And I just feel like their margin for error last year was pretty thin. And because of the losses they had on defense, I think that's going to result in a couple of those games that they won by a touchdown, they lose by a touchdown. That's where I'm at.
Look at the way, big picture, building culture, building program. And like you said, Deion Sanders, he is building the program because he's staying there. He knows he's staying there. Deion Sanders is building a program. You look at the evidence, like, yeah, he's not looking at Colorado as a long-term situation for him. But Rhett Lashley, similar to Deion, Ty Hawkins is his next. Like, he has 2 quarterbacks there, but Ty Hawkins is sitting in the waiting. It's his 25 quarterback. Like, this is the guy that when we're ready at every position, this is the guy that we're going to have. And
he recruited some dudes for him to throw to last year too.
Oh, Jalen Cooper and the Dalen, what's his last name? Dalen Singleton. Mm-hmm. Those top 2 receivers that he got. Jalen Cooper, Notre Dame tried to snatch him at the end.
And they almost got him.
Go back. Yeah.
They also have a 4-star running back that buddy of mine keeps telling me he wants Notre Dame to try to go get as their number 2 running back, who's a 4-star kid. So yeah, I mean, you saw, and they signed a 5-man receiver class last year. Dalen Singleton, you had Jalen Cooper, you had Carterius Brown, you had Isaiah Robertson, and then you had Link Rhodes. So, and signed 2 tight ends, and they signed a good running back out of Texas as well. And they signed 4 offensive linemen last year, Shaun, as well. So, again, that's defensively, they signed 2 defensive linemen from last year. That's an area like you talked about where they're still going to the portal until they're able to build that position up a little bit. I think he learned too from the previous year where they were very, very heavier on the portal the year before and only signed 11 kids and 16 kids. I like the fact that he's used the success to now, let's say now we can go out and get some more, because you aren't going to get top high school players. You're not going to get Ty Hawkins 2 years ago. You're not going to get Jalen Cooper 2 years ago when they're still in the AAC. If they don't make the move to the ACC, the minute Notre Dame comes after Jalen Cooper, it's a wrap. But now it's like, look what we did. We went to the playoff. We were in the ACC. We won the ACC. Won the ACC regular season championship. We went and played Clemson, and beat Louisville. We played this team. We played that team, and now you've got a chance to hold on to some of those guys. So I like what they did, but I do think they take a step back. Here's another team that I think takes a step back, Shaun, and I think this one could be I could be completely dead wrong on this one. Wouldn't be the first time. But I think Iowa State was one. Like, I see a lot of people say that BYU, had a lot of luck last year to win it. I don't agree with that. I think BYU was a very good football team last year because they were physical. They've got a lot of guys coming back. I look at Iowa State, Shaun, and I think they're that team that just kind of like everything went right for them last year. And they went from, what were they, like 4-8 the year before? What was their record in 2024? They weren't very good. They were 2023. I mean, what were they in 2023? They were 7-6. Lost to Iowa, lost to Ohio, lost to Memphis in a bowl game. They weren't a great football team in 2023. And in 2022 they were 4-8. Then they come out last year, they go 11-3. And I don't know, Shaun. I look at that football team and I think they caught some breaks by some teams being down. Their schedule wasn't super challenging. They lost to Texas Tech at home. They got smacked by Kansas in the postseason. They got blown out by Arizona State. They lost their 2,000-yard receivers. They got a lot coming back, Shaun, in the trenches and running back and quarterback. But I just think they're that team that everything went right for them last year. And I don't think what they did last year is repeatable. I mean, let's be honest, too. They don't beat Miami in the bowl game for their 11th win if Cam Ward doesn't sit out the second half of that game. And they almost lost to Emory Williams in that game. So I think Matt Campbell did a phenomenal coaching job last year. I think they're just more of a 7-8 win team this year. I think Iowa State takes a pretty decent step back this season. They're not going to have like an Oklahoma State drop off, like they go 3-9 this year. But I think they are a significantly less team this season. I do not view them as one of the teams that's going to compete for the Big 12 title. I think them and Colorado are the 2 teams that take the biggest backslides in the Big 12. What say you about that?
No, I totally agree with you. I think you're spot on with that. I considered them. I considered Vanderbilt. I considered Kentucky. Kentucky might be on a slide.
Yeah,
they might be on a slide.
Worse than 4-8.
Worse,
that would be bad,
man. Or they might just literally stack back-to-back horrible season. Like, I'm very interested in seeing if that shit can be corrected as well. So it's a lot of teams that I, considered, but
did you consider South Carolina or Ole Miss at all? Because I did.
Oh, see, look. I saw someone in the chat say that if Lane backed up this season with a similar season, could you consider him an elite coach? And I'm like, no. Like, you win an SEC championship. No.
Lane is going to be an SEC championship game.
Get 2, right. Like, dude, until further notice, Lane is who he is. He is who he is. So I expect whatever that little area is, I expect Mississippi to be right there. -1 game. It's like, I think plus or minus 1 game, that's what Mississippi is going to be.
Can I say something about that? Yeah. I had them on my list of teams I considered, But the reason that I took them off, I think they're going to be a much less effective team this year, or less talented team this year than they were last year.
Yeah.
But they so disappointed last year in losing 3 games that an 8-4 season is not a huge drop off based on the criteria we talked about.
Because they're a high and low program. They're a high and low program.
Right. They choking that last year's team had no business being 9-3, Shaun. None. And this way we say, well, like, I don't care what Ole Miss did in the past. Like, if Lane Kiffin would have gone 9-3 this year in the regular season because he just coached his butt off and got the most out of his football team, I'd say, well, that's a phenomenal job. It's not about the record, or they haven't had back-to-back 10-win seasons since when. I don't care about that. When you won 10 games on it with a roster that should have won 12, I'm not impressed by that. I don't care what they did in the past. You didn't get the most out of your football team. How do you say that? You just talked about Kentucky. Imagine how bad it would have been for Kentucky if they didn't upset Ole Miss at Ole Miss. They lost to Florida. How do you lose to Florida last year when you have when they were in a position to make the playoff? It wasn't even like they lost to Florida. They knew they weren't going to make the playoff. They didn't have anything to play for. They had a shot at that time, Shaun, to be a playoff team still. If they beat Florida and they're 10-2 at the end of the regular season, in my opinion, they're in the playoff. They are. They're in over they're probably in over Tennessee, to be honest with you. They might have been in over Indiana at 10-2. I could see 10-2 Ole Miss with a blowout win over Georgia, not a blowout, a convincing win over Georgia, being at home, being ranked higher than Indiana. I could have definitely seen that at 11-1 Indiana. Could have seen that. But they underachieved big time, and that's why I eventually went with them, because I look at their schedule. They play Georgia State, at Kentucky, home against Arkansas, home against Tulane. They get LSU at home. They get Washington State at home. Then they play at Georgia, at Oklahoma, home against South Carolina, home against Citadel, home against Florida, and then at Mississippi State. No Alabama, no Texas, no Texas A&M. They do got to play Florida and LSU, and they obviously got to play at Georgia. But the schedule definitely could have been harder than it was, and it's not. And I think that's why I see an 8-4 season. But their 8-4 is going to look not good, in my opinion, if they do go 8-4. And if I'm wrong, I think I'm wrong on them going back than I am them going forward. The reason that I like, as much as I dislike Lane Kiffin as a head coach, and why he's still a great offensive mind. I think Charlie Weiss Jr. has turned into a really good football coach, a really good offensive mind as well. I really like their quarterback. I really like Austin Simmons, Shaun. And I will admit, I'm putting a lot into a short bit of data. But he just showed me something coming off the bench against Georgia. And, I mean, think about how excited some Notre Dame fans get about Steve Angeli coming off and leading the team to a field goal drive, which was a huge drive. I mean, it was a very important drive. They needed those points. This cat comes off the bench after Jackson Dart throws a pick. Georgia goes down and takes a 7-0 lead, and this cat, Austin Simmons, leads them right down the field for a touchdown, hit throws. And they lose some very talented receivers, but they've got some guys coming in. The kid that they got from where was he? They got I think it was Stribling is I think the guy they got, who's a really highly ranked guy. Got a couple other portal guys. Their offensive line should be solid. They lose a ton of. I mean, their whole secondary is just completely revamped, and that's where I think Ole Miss takes the biggest step back. I don't know that their offense is going to be as good as it was last year, but their defense takes a huge step back. They lost a Florida DN. They lost Walter Nolan. They lose Jared Ivey. They lose Chris Paul. They lose Trey Amos. I mean, they lost a ton from last year's team. And I think defensively they take a big step back. And I don't know that Lane's going to have the personnel on offense to overcome a mediocre defense. So Pete Golding is going to look like the guy that we've always known him to be this season when he doesn't have all those stud D linemen he had last year. So I think Ole Miss is going to take a step back aesthetically. I just don't know if they're going to take a big step back record-wise because of the fact that they lost 2 games they had no business. They really lost 3 games they had no business losing. You led LSU the entire game. Like the only time you trailed against LSU was in overtime when LSU hit the game-winning score. That's it. I mean, they should have won every game they played last year. If you really go back and look at it, who was better than them that they played in the regular season? Nobody. They lost to a 4-8 Kentucky team, an 8-5 Florida team, and they choked the game away against LSU. So I just don't think that their schedule's tough enough for them really to get punished for it. That's where I'm at. So South Carolina, Shaun, what was your thoughts on them? Because I thought about them, but I'm not gonna pick them. But I know you're gonna bring
out my bias with my thoughts of South Carolina. So I don't think too highly of them. I'll just leave it at that. So I didn't think highly of them last year. Sellers is getting some hype. I don't buy him as a quarterback. And I think the entire program is just really emotional, right? I think they underachieve based upon some of the talent that they get and some of the talent that they have. When you see the guys that actually go on to the NFL and what they have, it's like, all right, they should be better. They gave a game away against Alabama, in my opinion. They gave the game away against LSU, right? And you can say what you want to say. Some people might feel like they gave a bowl game away against Illinois. Well, they should be beyond that at this point as a program, but they're not. And I just don't see the quarterback play really taking a necessary jump. And I just don't think they really do the most with what they have as a coaching staff. They don't maximize. So I think they are who they are. South Carolina is always going to be that promising team that's dangerous. And
they've been that our whole lives, Shaun. Our whole lives. There's always that coach that they say, even Lou Holtz. Remember, he came in, I think he beat Ohio State in the bowl game.
When Spurrier went there.
Yeah.
When Spurrier went back there, going back that far, he was, they were always dangerous. Like you have to watch them. But they were very good. Yeah.
I mean, he's the only coach that was ever able to actually, in my opinion, do what everybody thought that they could do. And I mean, because you look at that year, whether they played 2-3 years in a row, they played, or was it 3 years in a row, they won 11 games and finished second or third in the SEC East. And that followed a year where they played in the SEC title game in 2010. But then they went back to being South Carolina, went 7-6 in 2014, and then they fired him in 2015, and they've never been a great team since. But yeah, they're always that team that's got athletes, and they've got this transfer, they've got this athletic quarterback, and this is the year that South Carolina takes that jump. And I'm kind of with you. I just don't know if their schedule's tough enough for them to lose more than one game more than they did last year. It's another team, Shaun. First week of the season is going to tell us a lot about a lot of people. They get Virginia Tech in Atlanta on the first game of the year.
Yeah.
It's going to tell us a lot about both teams.
Virginia Tech is another team that's probably kicking themselves in the butt because they should have been 2 to 3 games better last year. They gave a couple games away, So
Bingo.
They got the Drones is coming back.
Yep. Anybody else, Shaun, that kind of you look at, or do we kind of get them all?
I think we got them. We did get them. I actually looked at my Illini, say, man, could they take a couple of games? Could they take a step back? But I think Brett is doing a really good job, or has done a good job recruiting in the portal.
Is your question, Shaun, was your question with Illinois that they kind of overachieved last year? And
I think last
maybe
year
they take a step back because of it.
I just don't trust. First of all, their receiving core. Actually, their receiving core was really one guy, Pat Bryant, who was respected in the NFL. Probably is going to end up being a mid-round pick and a solid NFL player, but he was really dynamic for them. And then Malik Elzy, which was a kid that Notre Dame looked at, and I forget the freshman that played last year. Yes. They're young, but they have talent.
By the way, I'm reading it. I didn't know that from my head. I'm looking at their.
No, I'm just saying they're young, but they have talent at the position. They got a couple of influx. Well, they got some influx of transfers. They do a really good job with transfers on the defensive line, along with recruiting. They mix and match really well, and their offensive line should really be the strength of their team, along with Altmaier coming back. So that for me just feeling like Altmaier is kind of just maxed out, and I don't really see them taking a jump offensively. But their backfield, their running backs will be a strength of their team. They will be able to pound with the offensive line and running backs. They'll be able to pound teams. And if Altmaier can just not make mistakes and be efficient, they'll be able to replicate what they did last year and have a shot at upsetting a team like Indiana or maybe a few more teams. But
yeah,
I thought about them, but then I settled on they're probably going to be who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another 8-9 win season. I get
Yeah.
that. But Shaun, before we wrap up, I did want to make a quick comment about obviously a former Notre Dame player, Drew Pine, committed to Bowling Green today. This will be the fourth team he's played on in 4 years. And what I think this is an example of is I think more and more portal players fail to understand who they are. And we see this more than we should, where you see guys go to schools and you're like, why are you going there? Because teams are just kind of loading up on guys. And a lot of these portal kids are sort of security blankets in case this other guy doesn't step up or whatever the case may be. We've seen a lot of guys go places and not get that chance or not play a whole lot. The reality is I understand why Drew Pine went to Arizona State. I didn't agree with it. I think he's in, but once you left Arizona State, you then should have not made the mistake of then going to Missouri. I think Drew Pine is one of those young men that honestly should have stayed one more year at Notre Dame and got his degree and then transferred to Bowling Green or a school like that right away. I think too many young men, and they have this dream of playing at this certain level when it's like, dude, you get a chance to play, go play. You know, and I'm happy for Drew. I'm happy for Eddie George. I think Drew is a very good quarterback at that level. My issue with Drew is I loved him as a sophomore in high school. He just never grew. He just literally maxed out athletically and arm talent-wise as a sophomore. And just this is a level I think he could actually really thrive at. And I think this was a smart pickup by Eddie George to kind of get a guy like Drew and allow him to kind of come in and he's going to be a 6th-year senior this year. You know, great opportunity for him to come in and thrive. But I wish more and more of these portal kids would say, hey, listen, maybe they're not going to pay you quite as much money. It's not like I'm not saying turn down $1 million to go pay for 50 grand in the MAC. I'm not saying that, but you're not getting $1 million. You know, if you're that kind of player, you're not getting $1 million. But hey, don't take the 100,000, take the 50,000, go play in the MAC because you can actually play there and get an opportunity to play there. And maybe somebody at the next level notices you as opposed to being buried on the bench at this Power 5 school. And now you have very little chance to go play. And I wish more kids would do that. I wish more Power 5 kids would take advantage of the portal by going down. Go to Boise. Go to Memphis. Go to a school like that. Go to a Bowling Green, a Toledo. Maybe you don't get quite as much NIL money, but you're still going to get some NIL money. You're going to have a chance to get your degree, but you're going to have a chance to play. And that's the big thing. There's so many kids missing out on that chance because they're jumping up. Go down there, play at a Bowling Green, play at a Toledo, play at a Troy, play at a Memphis, play at a school like that, played in East Carolina, played at Tulane. Like the quarterback from Tulane, I get that he got paid, but I'm like, dude, you're gonna look back and say, I should have stayed at Tulane when you see what happens to you at Duke this year. So who's another team I think is going to take a step back this season, but I didn't really care to spend much more time talking about Duke than I did just now. So I'm happy for Drew. I'm really happy for Drew. I am.
It's a great weekend for me. You know, because watching, look, I'll be honest, Notre Dame fans don't get mad at me. As you know, a couple of Notre Dame recruits literally are from Durham, North Carolina in the 26th class. And I just happened to be conversing with them on Saturday night as Duke blew an 8-point lead with just a minute left in the game. Houston goes on an 11-zip run. And yeah, in the middle of the conversation, I trolled them. I did. I trolled them. I let them have it. I had a little fun. They were disappointed. So when you mentioned Duke, I just had because I can't stand Duke
So
basketball.
if
I just
Notre
can't.
Dame doesn't finish well recruiting the state of North
Blame
Carolina for
me.
the 2026
Blame,
class, we're going to all look back and blame
blame my
Sean Davis.
trolling. My trolling of Duke's Final Four is the reason why. Yeah, by all means,
but I am
blame
happy
me.
for Drew, Sean. I am happy for Drew, and I do hope he finishes his career off with a bang. I do because
This
he's a
is all
good
I have
kid.
to
I just
say.
think he made
This
some
is all
bad
I have to
decisions.
say about the situation. Drew Pine getting the opportunity to play quarterback at Notre Dame is a dream for a kid like him. Dream. I don't fault Drew Pine for taking the offer, for committing. What I do blame him for is his evaluation. And I think this is something that a lot of these young men have to realize is that if you're not honest with yourself, this transfer portal can become somewhat of a mirage to where you see something that's really not there. You see an opportunity that it's really not there. And I think being honest with yourself first is the greatest thing you can do before you consider jumping into the portal.
Yep.
And going where you need to go. Because being honest with yourself will rightly allow you to discern where you need to be. And I think, the two decisions that he made just wasn't the proper discernment. It wasn't. It didn't line up with his skill set and who he was. And so he needs to go to a program. In my honest opinion, regardless of whether or not it ended up being the MAC, a program that is going to have a hard-nosed, defensive-minded coach that's going to lean on the trenches and running the ball. That is what made Drew Pine successful. He should have been looking at culture and what's going to allow him to be the best that he can be. That is what allowed him to be successful in Notre Dame, is that Notre Dame had offensive line play in a run game that he could play off of. And as he evolved and developed and became better in the passing game, going up to a wide open system like Missouri, that's Drew. That's at that point in time, that's not a fit. That's not a fit. My assumption is Eddie George is going to be about running the ball. That's
now they weren't real good running the ball at Tennessee State because they didn't have players. They actually ran a spread offense that threw a lot of quick game, and I think Drew's going to fit that really well. He'll have different players.
That's more of an HBCU thing,
right?
Like the vast majority of HBCU schools are going to have wide open offenses. To your point,
and they don't have line. They can't get the linemen. Exactly.
Yeah. But going to the MAC, he's probably going to lean more towards what he wants to do, which is run the ball.
Right.
Be sound in the trenches. And Drew should be able to have a really good year. I expect Drew to have a really good year because he's definitely going to be a leader.
I look at kids like him and I say, this is why the portal should not be what it is. This is why the portal should be a sit out a year and transfer, because Drew Pine made a 100% emotional decision to transfer from Notre Dame. He was upset that he was not going to be the starter in the bowl game, and he was not going to be the starter the next year. And so he jumps in the portal thinking, I just started 10 games at Notre Dame. I just went 8-2 at Notre Dame. People are going to want me. Arizona State brought him in for one reason only, to be the bridge between Jaden Rashada. And he wasn't even that. And then Rashada got hurt. Then that didn't work out because he knew he wasn't going to be starter the next year. It was going to be Sam Levitt. Who, you then go to Missouri and you're spending a whole year as a backup. Where if the portal was not what it was, let's talk about sometimes we as adults need to make sure that we are the ones saying we do know better than what a 19 or 20-year-old knows. And this is why I do like the portal the way it is, because Drew Pine in the old system would have been forced to stay at Notre Dame for a year, or not forced to stay at Notre Dame. That's inaccurate. He would have been forced to think a lot harder about whether he wanted to leave. And I think ultimately would have made a decision to come back for the 23 season, get his degree from Notre Dame, which I don't believe he has, and then transfer to a Bowling Green where you can then be a 2-year starting quarterback on top of having your career at Notre Dame. And you're going to be able to look back with way better memories than spending a miserable year in Tempe and a miserable year in Columbia, Missouri. And you'd have a degree from Notre Dame. I feel the same way about Tyler Buckner. he would have maybe had to make a different decision if he couldn't transfer and play right away. I don't know that Alabama would have wanted Tyler if he would have had to sit out a year. And that's why I say that this open portal system where kids can make way more emotional decisions is not good for them. It's not good for them. We have a right to do this. Yes, you always had a right to transfer, but you had to make a more thoughtful decision because you had to sit out a year. And so you had to make a more thoughtful decision. Do you really want to sit out a year, not play next year? Because here's the thing with Drew is if he comes back for Notre Dame and gets his degree, he can graduate and go wherever the heck he wants and be eligible right away under the old system. And knowing how smart Drew is, he probably graduates in December, and then wherever he's going to go, he can go there for the spring and then have that time to prepare. That's one of the things that I just really he's an example of why this portal is an incredibly broken system. One of a million examples of why the current portal system is just an absolute embarrassment and joke and needs to be fixed. Because his situation will look a whole lot different now. But I'm happy for him. I hope he's able to finish his career off on a good note because I think Drew's a good kid. Comes from a good family, and he just but these are the choices he made. And I think a different system would have encouraged him to maybe make a little bit of a wiser, less emotional decision.
Yeah.
And that's my thoughts on that. So that's going to do it for today's show, Shaun. Anything else you want to say before we depart? These are wonderful.
No, thank you guys once again for tapping into the RTCF show. We want to bring you great conversation, great topics each and every week. And I'm looking forward to some great news coming out of the April 10th decision that's awaiting us as we sit and wait to see what Rodney Denham does. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure, at some point this week. And then we'll get back to another topic we want to talk about. We want to do our due diligence. And we're probably going to talk about that next week. And most of all, watch The Voice tonight at 7 p.m. There you go.
Why should they do that, Shaun? I'm just curious.
My beautiful daughter, Ari Camille, is going to be performing 7 p.m. tonight on The Voice on NBC outlets all over the country. So absolutely. Thank you for you guys that continue to support, reach out, show love, continue to do so. Ari Camille, all of our music, all DSPs. Go enjoy.
No better way to end it. Boards at irishbreakdown.com. We'll talk to you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.